The railing splintered like kindling beneath Catherine Vaughn's boots, and for one heart-stopping moment she was weightless, plummeting toward the dusty street 2 stories below with nothing but empty air and certain death waiting to greet her. Strong arms caught her mid-fall, absorbing the impact with a grunt as her rescuer stumbled backward 3 steps before regaining his balance. Catherine gasped, her hands instinctively clutching at rough cotton fabric and solid muscle as the world spun dizzy circles around her. When her vision cleared, she found herself staring into eyes the color of summer grass, set in a sun-bronzed face shadowed by the brim of a worn Stetson. "You all right, madam?" The cowboy's voice was rough as gravel, tinged with concern as he gently set her on her feet, his hands lingering at her waist to steady her. Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs, though whether from the near-death experience or the stranger's proximity, she couldn't quite say. "I believe so." "Thank you. I thought certain I was about to meet my maker." The man stepped back, removing his hat to reveal dark brown hair that fell nearly to his collar. He was young, perhaps 25 to her 23, with the lean, rangy build of someone who spent his days in the saddle. "Graham Irving, madam. Lucky I happened to be passing by. That widow's walk looks like it has not been tended to in some time. Catherine Vaughn." She brushed dust from her black mourning dress, acutely aware of how the fabric clung to her trembling limbs. "And yes, my late husband never saw fit to maintain much of anything on this property before he passed 6 months ago. I was up there trying to assess what repairs might be needed, though I suppose I have my answer now." Graham's gaze drifted upward to the broken railing dangling precariously from the 2nd-story platform. "Begging your pardon, Mrs. Vaughn, but that whole structure looks ready to come down. You should not go up there again until it has been properly rebuilt." "Sound advice, Mr. Irving, though I am afraid my budget for repairs is rather limited at present." Catherine attempted a smile that felt more like a grimace. Her whole body was beginning to ache from the jarring catch, and she suspected she would be covered in bruises come morning. "Still, I am grateful you were there. Might I offer you something to drink as thanks? It is the least I can do after you saved my life." The cowboy hesitated, his hat turning between his calloused hands. "I would not want to impose on your time, madam." "Nonsense, I insist." Catherine gestured toward the modest 2-story house that she had called home for the past 3 years of her marriage. "Please, Mr. Irving, it would ease my conscience considerably." She did not wait for his agreement, instead walking toward the front door with as much dignity as she could muster on shaking legs. Behind her, she heard the soft scuff of boots following, and something warm bloomed in her chest that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the memory of strong arms catching her fall. The interior of the house was dim and cool, a welcome relief from the harsh Colorado sunlight that beat down on St. Elmo this July afternoon in 1883. Catherine moved through the sparse parlor toward the kitchen, acutely aware of Graham's presence behind her as he paused in the doorway, clearly uncomfortable with the propriety of the situation. "Please sit." She indicated one of the simple wooden chairs at the kitchen table. "I have fresh water from the well, or coffee if you prefer something stronger." "Water would be fine, thank you." Graham settled onto the chair, placing his hat on the table beside him. In the soft light filtering through the curtains, Catherine could better appreciate the strong lines of his face, the small scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the way his shoulders filled out his faded blue shirt. She poured 2 glasses of water from the pitcher, then joined him at the table, grateful to be off her feet. Her hands were still trembling slightly as she raised the glass to her lips. "You are not from St. Elmo originally," Graham observed, his voice carefully neutral. "Your accent it has Eastern refinement to it. Philadelphia, Catherine confirmed. I came west 3 years ago when I married Robert Vaughn. He had mining interests here, though they proved far less lucrative than he claimed. She heard the bitterness in her own voice and winced. Forgive me. It is not proper to speak ill of the dead. Sometimes the dead deserve to be spoken ill of. Graham's blunt response startled her into meeting his gaze. A man who brings a woman all the way from civilization to a rough mining town and then leaves her alone without means, well, that is not much of a husband in my estimation. Catherine felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with embarrassment. You speak very plainly, Mr. Irving. My mother always said I had more honesty than sense. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Got me into trouble more times than I can count, but I figure people deserve the truth, even when it is uncomfortable. And what truth might you tell me about yourself? Catherine found herself genuinely curious about this stranger who had literally dropped into her life. Are you passing through St. Elmo, or do you have business here? Bit of both. I have been working cattle drives up from Texas the past few years, but I am looking to settle down somewhere with good grazing land. Heard Colorado territory has opportunities for a man willing to work hard. He took a long drink of water, his throat working. Been scouting properties between here and Buena Vista, trying to get a feel for the land and the people. It is beautiful country, Catherine agreed. Harsh but beautiful. The winters can be brutal up here at elevation, and the mining has brought in all sorts of characters, not all of them savory. But there is something about these mountains that gets into your blood. They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing with surprising ease. Catherine learned that Graham had grown up on a small ranch in Texas, the youngest of 4 brothers. His parents had both passed from fever when he was 18. And his eldest brother had inherited the family property. Rather than work as a hired hand on land that would never be his, Graham had struck out on his own, determined to build something of his own making. In turn, she found herself sharing details of her own life that she had not spoken aloud in years. Her comfortable but restrictive upbringing as the daughter of a Philadelphia banker. The whirlwind courtship with Robert Vaughn, who had seemed so dashing and full of promise. The harsh reality of marriage to a man who drank too much and gambled away whatever small profits his failing mind produced. His death from pneumonia the previous winter, leaving her alone in a town where she knew almost no one, with debts she could barely comprehend. Why stay? Graham asked gently. You could return to Philadelphia, start over where you have family. My father disowned me when I married against his wishes. He wanted me to wed a business associate of his, a man twice my age with 3 children already grown. Robert seemed like freedom in comparison. Catherine laughed without humor. I chose this life, Mr. Irving. It would be cowardice to run from it now. Besides, I have nowhere else to go. Graham was quiet for a long moment, his green eyes studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. You are stronger than you give yourself credit for, Mrs. Vaughn. The words settled around her heart like a warm blanket, chasing away some of the cold loneliness that had been her constant companion these past 6 months. A sharp knock at the front door shattered the intimate moment. Catherine rose, smoothing her skirts as she went to answer it. On the porch stood Harold Kemper, the portly banker who held the note on her property, his florid face already glistening with sweat despite the relatively mild temperature. Mrs. Vaughn. He removed his bowler hat, revealing a balding pate. I hope I am not calling at an inopportune time. Not at all, Mr. Kemper. What can I do for you? Catherine kept her voice carefully neutral, though dread pooled in her stomach. The banker never called with good news. I am afraid we need to discuss your outstanding loan. You have missed the last 2 payments, and the bank cannot continue to extend credit indefinitely." His small eyes darted past her into the house, no doubt noting Graham's presence. "Perhaps we should speak privately." Mr. Irving was just leaving. Catherine glanced back at the cowboy, who had risen from his seat and was settling his hat back on his head. "Thank you again for your assistance earlier." "My pleasure, madam." Graham's voice was formal, but his eyes held a promise as they met hers. "I will be in town for the next few days at the Mountain View boarding house, if you have need of anything." He moved past her onto the porch, tipping his hat to Kemper before descending the steps with long, easy strides. Catherine watched him go, feeling as though something bright had been extinguished. "Now then," Kemper's voice pulled her attention back. "About your debt." The conversation that followed was as unpleasant as Catherine had feared. The bank wanted full payment within 30 days, or they would foreclose on the property. The amount owed was staggering, accumulated from Robert's various failed ventures and his habit of using the house as collateral for his gambling debts. 30 days is impossible," Catherine protested. "I have been taking in sewing and laundry, but I could not possibly earn that amount in such a short time. Can we not work out a payment arrangement? The bank has been more than generous in allowing you this much time already." Kemper's tone was officious, though she caught the way his gaze lingered on her figure. "However, there might be another solution. A woman alone in your position, well, you might consider finding a husband who could assume your debts." "I myself am a widower, and I would be willing to—" "Thank you, Mr. Kemper, but I have no intention of remarrying." Catherine kept her voice icy despite the rage simmering beneath her skin. "I will find a way to satisfy the debt. Good day." She all but shut the door in his face, then leaned against it, her composure crumbling. 30 days. How could she possibly come up with that much money in 30 days? She had already sold most of her jewelry and anything else of value. The house itself was worthless without the land, and the land was mortgaged beyond its worth. That night, Catherine lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind churning through impossible solutions. She could leave St. Elmo, simply walk away from the debt and start over somewhere else under a different name. But that felt like stealing, abandoning an obligation even if Robert had been the one to create it. She could accept Kemper's revolting offer, trade her freedom for financial security. The thought made her stomach turn. Or she could find Graham Irving and ask if his earlier kindness extended to helping her find legitimate work. Perhaps as a cook or housekeeper for the ranch he hoped to establish. It was shameless, trading on a brief acquaintance, but desperation made shamelessness seem less important than survival. Morning found her at the Mountain View boarding house, a respectable establishment run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson. Catherine had dressed in her best day dress, a dark blue cotton that at least was not quite as funereal as her mourning blacks. Mr. Irving took breakfast an hour ago and then rode out toward the Barlow property, Mrs. Patterson informed her, her keen eyes taking in every detail of Catherine's appearance. "Said he would be back by mid-afternoon if you would like to wait." "I will return later, thank you." Catherine retreated, feeling foolish. What had she been thinking, chasing after a man she had just met? He had saved her from falling, nothing more. His kindness did not obligate him to rescue her from her entire life. She spent the day taking in alterations at her kitchen table, her needle flying through fabric with practiced efficiency. It was delicate work that paid poorly, but it was honest and she was skilled at it. By late afternoon, she had completed 2 dresses and a pair of trousers, earning enough to buy food for the next few days. It was nowhere near what she needed, but it was something. A knock at the door interrupted her work just as she was putting away her sewing basket. Catherine opened it to find Graham on her porch, his hat in his hands and an uncertain expression on his face. "Mrs. Vaughn, I hope I am not intruding, but I wanted to check that you were feeling all right after yesterday's excitement. You took quite a shock." "I am well, thank you." Catherine stepped back. "Would you like to come in?" "I was just about to make some supper. Nothing fancy, but you are welcome to share it if you have not eaten." "I would not want to impose on your hospitality." "You keep saying that, yet I keep inviting you. Perhaps you should accept that I genuinely would enjoy the company." The words came out more forcefully than she intended, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Forgive me. I have spent too much time alone, I think. My manners have grown rusty." Graham's face broke into a genuine smile that transformed his serious features. "In that case, Mrs. Vaughn, I would be honored to join you for supper." She set him to slicing bread while she fried potatoes and salt pork, the simple domesticity of working side by side in the kitchen, creating an intimacy that should have felt strange, but somehow did not. They ate at the kitchen table, and Catherine found herself laughing at Graham's stories of life on the cattle trails, the mishaps and adventures that seemed larger than life. "You should have seen Dusty Patterson trying to rope that ornery longhorn," Graham said, his eyes crinkling with amusement. "The steer went left, Dusty went right, and his horse went straight into the creek. We fished him out sputtering and covered in mud, cursing in 3 languages. I cannot imagine living that way, constantly on the move, sleeping under the stars." Catherine propped her chin on her hand, entranced by the picture he painted. "It sounds lonely." "It was," Graham admitted. "That is why I want to put down roots somewhere, build something permanent, something that will last beyond my own lifetime. A man needs more than just a bedroll and a good horse to make a life worth living." The conversation turned more serious as the evening wore on. Catherine found herself confessing her meeting with the banker, her desperate financial situation, though she stopped short of asking Graham directly for help. 30 days is not much time," Graham said quietly. "What will you do?" "I do not know. I have been praying for a miracle, but God seems rather busy elsewhere at the moment." She attempted a light tone that fooled neither of them. "I suppose I will think of something. I always do." Graham was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the table. What if there was another way? "Not marrying that banker fellow, but a business arrangement of sorts." "I am listening." "I have saved most of my wages from the past few years. It is enough to buy land and stock it with cattle, but not enough to also purchase buildings or hire hands for the first season. If I paid off your debt, you would keep the house and property, and I could use the land for grazing. We would be partners in a sense." Catherine's heart hammered in her chest. "That is incredibly generous, Mr. Irving, but I could not possibly accept such charity." "What would you gain from such an arrangement?" "Land to use until I can buy my own, a place to stay that is not a boarding house, and perhaps the company of someone who does not think my dreams of building a ranch are foolish." His green eyes met hers steadily. "I would not offer if I did not think it would benefit us both." "People would talk," Catherine said slowly. "A widow and an unmarried man sharing property, even with separate living arrangements. Let them talk. I have never cared much for gossip." Graham leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Mrs. Vaughn, Catherine, I know we have only just met. This might seem like madness. But I have spent the last 3 years drifting from place to place, and yesterday when I caught you falling, it felt like fate putting me exactly where I needed to be. I am not proposing marriage or anything improper, just a partnership between 2 people who could help each other." Catherine studied his face, searching for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. She found only honest sincerity and something else, something that made her pulse quicken and her breath come faster. You would truly do this. Pay off a debt that is not yours for land you do not own. I would, if you will accept. She thought of Kemper's leering suggestion, of the alternative futures that stretched before her bleak and hopeless. Then she thought of Graham's easy company, his straightforward honesty, the way he had looked at her as though she was someone worth saving. Yes, Catherine heard herself say. Yes, Mr. Irving, I accept your offer. The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, bright and full of promise. They spent the next day at the bank, where Graham shocked Harold Kemper by producing enough money to pay Catherine's debt in full. The banker's face cycled through surprise, displeasure, and finally grudging acceptance as he prepared the paperwork releasing the lien on the property. I hope you know what you are doing, Irving, Kemper muttered as he stamped the final documents. That property is not worth half what you just paid. The worth of something depends on what you value, Graham replied evenly. I value keeping my word and helping someone in need. I suspect you would not understand that. Catherine had to bite her lip to keep from smiling at Kemper's outraged expression as they left the bank, the deed to her property finally free and clear in her hands. I cannot believe you did that, she said once they were safely outside. I keep expecting to wake up and find this was all a dream. It is real enough. Now comes the hard part, figuring out how to make this partnership work. Graham squinted up at the sun, gauging the time. I should ride back to Buena Vista and collect my gear. Let the foreman know I am settling here. That will take a few days. Will you be all right on your own? I have been on my own for 6 months, Mr. Irving. A few more days will not hurt me. Catherine clutched the deed to her chest. But please come back. I find I have grown accustomed to your company rather quickly. Wild horses could not keep me away, Mrs. Vaughn. He tipped his hat, and then he was gone, leaving Catherine standing on the dusty street with a piece of paper that represented both her past and her future. The next 3 days passed with agonizing slowness. Catherine threw herself into preparing the property for Graham's return, clearing out a small outbuilding that could serve as temporary quarters for him, until they worked out better arrangements. She scrubbed and swept until her hands were raw, driven by a restless energy that had nothing to do with cleanliness, and everything to do with the anticipation coiling in her chest. The other women in town had begun to notice her improved spirits, and the gossip started as predicted. Catherine endured knowing looks and whispered conversations that stopped when she entered the general store. She held her head high and ignored them, focusing instead on stocking supplies and planning how they would use the land. Graham returned on the 4th day, leading a pack horse loaded with his possessions and driving a small wagon containing tools and supplies. Catherine heard the commotion from inside the house and came out to find him in the yard, looking travel-worn but pleased. "Welcome home," she called, then felt heat rise in her face at the presumption. "That is, welcome back to St. Elmo. Home sounds just fine to me." Graham swung down from his horse, dust rising from his clothes. "I brought lumber and supplies for fixing that widow's walk, along with some other repairs the place needs. Figured we should start with keeping the roof over your head from killing you." Over the following weeks, they fell into an easy routine. Graham worked from dawn until dusk repairing the house, rebuilding the widow's walk with solid timber and proper joinery. Catherine cooked meals for them both and continued taking in sewing, while also beginning to plant a late-season garden that might provide vegetables before the first frost. They talked during meals and in the evenings, sharing stories and dreams and slowly learning the contours of each other's character. Catherine discovered that Graham was unfailingly honest, but also possessed a dry wit that caught her off guard and made her laugh until her sides ached. He was patient with stubborn lumber and frightened horses, but had no tolerance for cruelty or injustice. He read poetry when he thought no one was watching, and he could play a battered harmonica with surprising skill. For his part, Graham seemed equally fascinated by Catherine. He asked about her life in Philadelphia, her thoughts on everything from politics to philosophy. He listened when she spoke about the loneliness of her marriage, the way Robert had slowly crushed her spirit with his indifference and his vices. He never judged, only absorbed and understood in a way that made her feel truly seen for the first time in years. "You ever regret coming west?" Graham asked one evening as they sat on the newly repaired Widow's Walk, watching the sun set over the mountains in streaks of gold and crimson. "I regret marrying the wrong man," Catherine said honestly. "But I do not regret the journey itself. If I had stayed in Philadelphia, I would have become someone else entirely. Someone smaller and more afraid. Here, despite everything, I have found strengths I did not know I possessed." "You are remarkable, you know that." Graham's voice was quiet, almost reverent. "The way you have survived, the dignity you maintain, you could have become bitter and broken, but instead you are still fighting, still hoping for better." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. "I am not remarkable. I am just stubborn. There is a difference." "No." Graham turned to face her, his expression serious in the fading light. "There really is not." His hand found hers on the railing between them, his calloused fingers intertwining with her smaller ones. The touch sent electricity racing up Catherine's arm, and she knew with sudden, crystalline clarity that this was no longer just a business arrangement. Somewhere in the past few weeks, she had started falling in love with Graham Irving. The realization terrified her. She had sworn never to marry again, never to give a man that kind of power over her life. But Graham was nothing like Robert. Where her late husband had been selfish and weak, Graham was generous and strong. Where Robert had taken, Graham gave freely. Where Robert had diminished her, Graham made her feel larger than life. "Catherine," Graham's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "I need to be honest with you about something." Her heart stuttered. "What is it?" "This partnership we have. It has come to mean more to me than just a business arrangement. I find myself thinking about you constantly, looking for excuses to be near you. I know it is too soon after your loss, and I do not want to make you uncomfortable, but I would be dishonest if I did not tell you that my feelings have become rather more personal than professional." Catherine's breath caught. "Graham, you do not have to say anything." He squeezed her hand gently. "I just needed you to know. I will not press you or expect anything. Your friendship is enough, but I wanted to be truthful about where my heart stands." "My heart stands in the same place," Catherine whispered. "I am terrified by it, but it is there nonetheless." Graham's face lit with such joy that Catherine felt her own heart expand to match it. "You mean it." "I do. You have become essential to me in ways I cannot quite explain. When you are near, I feel safe and valued and hopeful. When you are away, I count the minutes until your return. If that is not love, or at least the beginning of it, then I do not know what is." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that felt like a brand and a benediction all at once. "I will spend every day earning that trust, Catherine. I swear it." They sat together on the Widow's Walk as stars began to prick the darkening sky, hands clasped and hearts full. Below them, St. Elmo settled into evening quiet, lamplight glowing golden in windows, the sound of a piano drifting from the saloon down the street. It was a peaceful moment, perfect in its simplicity. The peace lasted exactly 1 week. Catherine was hanging laundry in the yard when she heard the horses. 6 men rode up to the house, rough-looking types with guns slung low on their hips. The leader, A scarred man with cold eyes and a badge that looked questionably authentic dismounted and approached where Graham was working on the fence line. "You Irving?" The man's voice carried across the yard, harsh and demanding. "I am. What is your business?" Graham set down his hammer, his posture alert but not yet hostile. "Marshal Thornton sent me to bring you in for questioning. Seems there was a bank robbery down in Texas last year, and witnesses put someone matching your description at the scene." Catherine felt ice flood her veins. She moved closer, her wet laundry forgotten. "That is ridiculous. Mr. Irving has been working cattle drives. He is no bank robber. With respect, madam, the law does not need your opinion." The man's eyes raked over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Irving, you can come peacefully or we can make this difficult. I have never robbed a bank in my life." Graham's voice was steady, but Catherine could see tension in the set of his shoulders. There must be some mistake. That is for the marshal to decide. "Now are you coming, or do my boys need to persuade you?" Catherine saw Graham's hand drift toward the rifle leaning against the fence post, and she knew with terrible certainty that this situation could turn deadly in a heartbeat. "Wait, please. Is there not some way to verify Mr. Irving's whereabouts during this alleged robbery? Someone who can vouch for him? Sure, if you can produce witnesses right now." The man's smile was nasty. "But I am guessing you cannot, which means he is coming with us." "Let me gather some things," Graham said quietly. His eyes found Catherine's, and she read a message there that she could not quite decipher. "Mrs. Vaughn, if you would please pack me a bag," she understood. He wanted her inside, away from potential danger. Catherine nodded and hurried into the house, her mind racing. This felt wrong, deeply wrong. The man's badge looked authentic enough at first glance, but something about the whole situation rang false. Why would a marshal send 6 armed men for a simple questioning? Why not just send a telegram asking Graham to come in voluntarily? Catherine grabbed a canvas bag and began stuffing it with clothes, but her mind was working furiously. She needed help, needed someone with actual authority to verify this was legitimate. The nearest proper lawman was the sheriff in Buena Vista, a full day's ride away. Through the window, she watched Graham being forced onto his horse, his hands tied in front of him. The sight made her blood boil with helpless rage. She wanted to run out there with Robert's old pistol and demand they release him, but she was pragmatic enough to know that would only get them both killed. As soon as the riders disappeared down the road with Graham in their midst, Catherine was moving. She ran to the neighbors, the Hendersons, an older couple who raised chickens and kept largely to themselves. "Mrs. Vaughn, what is wrong?" Mrs. Henderson took one look at Catherine's face and ushered her inside. Men came and took Mr. Irving, claimed he was wanted for bank robbery. "Something is not right about it. I need to get to Buena Vista to the sheriff, but I cannot ride well enough to make that journey alone." The words tumbled out in a rush. Mr. Henderson, a grizzled former prospector, exchanged a significant look with his wife. "Describe these men." Catherine did, painting as detailed a picture as her frightened mind could manage. Mr. Henderson's face grew progressively grimmer as she spoke. "That was no marshal's posse," he said flatly. "That was Caleb Reeves and his gang. They have been terrorizing this territory for months, pretending to be lawmen to rob and extort folks. If they took your young man, they are not taking him to any jail." Catherine felt the world tilt sideways. "Then where? What do they want with him? Money, most like. They will take him somewhere isolated, try to force him to tell them where he keeps his valuables. When they realize he does not have much, well." Henderson trailed off, but the implication was clear. "We have to help him." Catherine heard the desperation in her own voice. "Please. I cannot just let them kill him. "You are not going to," Mrs. Henderson said firmly. "Jacob, saddle up, I will get provisions. Martha, you cannot be thinking that young man helped Mrs. Vaughn when she needed it. Now it is our turn to help him. Besides, Caleb Reeves has gotten away with his crimes for too long. Maybe it is time someone stood up to him." Mrs. Henderson's eyes were fierce despite her age. "Now hurry. Every minute we waste puts that boy in more danger." Within the hour, a small rescue party had assembled. The Hendersons, Catherine, and 3 other men from town who were willing to risk confronting Reeves, all armed and mounted. One of the men, a former Army scout named Thomas Wright, studied the ground where the horses had left tracks. "They are heading northwest, toward the old Hollister mine," Wright announced. "Place has been abandoned for 2 years. Perfect spot for an ambush or interrogation." "How far?" Catherine asked, gripping her borrowed horse's reins with white-knuckled determination. She was not an experienced rider, but she would learn quickly or die trying. 3 hours if we push hard. Maybe 4. Wright mounted his horse. "We need to be smart about this. Reeves has 6 men. We have 6 people, but only 4 of us know how to fight. We cannot just charge in guns blazing." They rode hard, the Colorado landscape rushing past in a blur of pine forests and rocky outcroppings. Catherine focused on staying in the saddle, every jarring step sending pain through her inexperienced body. She did not care. All that mattered was reaching Graham before it was too late. The sun was low in the sky when they reached a ridge overlooking the Hollister mine. Below, Catherine could see a ramshackle collection of buildings surrounding a dark shaft entrance. Horses were tethered outside the largest structure, and smoke rose from a makeshift chimney. "That is them," Henderson confirmed, peering through a small spyglass. "I count 6 horses, but I can only see 3 men outside. The others must be in the building with your friend." "We need a diversion," Wright said, thinking out loud. "Something to draw them out so we are not fighting in an enclosed space where they have the advantage." "I will do it." Catherine heard herself say the words before she had fully thought them through. "I will ride down there and demand to speak with Graham." "They will not shoot a woman outright, not where others might see. That should draw them out, give you a chance to get into position." "Absolutely not." Henderson's voice was flat. "Too dangerous." "You have a better idea." Catherine met his eyes steadily. "We are running out of daylight, and you said yourself we cannot storm the building. Let me do this. I am the one they will least expect to fight back." After heated debate, they reluctantly agreed. Catherine would approach openly, demanding to speak with Graham under the pretense of delivering his belongings. Meanwhile, Wright and the others would circle around, using the terrain for cover. At the first sign of trouble, they would intervene. Catherine's heart hammered as she guided her horse down the slope toward the mine, the canvas bag she had packed earlier slung over her shoulder. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around, to let the men handle this. But this was Graham's life at stake, and she could not sit safely aside while he faced danger alone. The 3 men outside the building noticed her approach, hands drifting toward their weapons. Catherine raised her arms to show she was unarmed, though her pulse was racing so fast she felt lightheaded. "I am here to see Graham Irving," she called out, keeping her voice steady through sheer force of will. "I brought his things." The scarred leader, Reeves, emerged from the building, his expression a mix of surprise and amusement. "Well now, this is unexpected. Little lady, you should not have come all this way. Your friend is busy answering some questions. Then I will wait until he is finished. He will need fresh clothes and food." Catherine dismounted, her legs shaking but her spine straight. "Where is he?" "Inside." "But you are not going in there." Reeves moved to block her path, and Catherine caught a glimpse past him into the dim interior. Graham was tied to a chair, his face already showing signs of a beating. Rage, bright and sharp, flooded through her. "You said he was being questioned. This looks more like torture." She heard her voice rise, aristocratic Philadelphia diction sharpening each word into a weapon. "Whatever authority you claim to have, it does not extend to beating unarmed men." Feisty. Reeves stepped closer, his breath reeking of whiskey and tobacco. "I like that in a woman. Maybe when we are done with your boyfriend there, you and I can get better acquainted." "I would sooner kiss a rattlesnake." Catherine spit the words at him, and his face darkened with anger. He raised his hand to strike her, and that was when all hell broke loose. A gunshot cracked across the clearing, and one of Reeves's men dropped, clutching his shoulder. Wright and the others burst from cover, weapons drawn. Reeves grabbed for Catherine, but she twisted away, dropping to the ground as bullets began to fly overhead. She scrambled toward the building on hands and knees, desperation lending her courage she did not know she possessed. Inside, Graham was struggling against his bonds, his eyes wide with fear when he saw her. "Catherine, get out of here," he shouted. "Not without you." She found a rusty knife on a nearby table and began sawing at the ropes binding his wrists. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip the blade, but adrenaline gave her strength. The rope parted just as one of Reeves's men appeared in the doorway. Graham surged to his feet, grabbing Catherine and pulling her behind him as the man raised his pistol. The shot went wide, splintering wood beside Catherine's head. Graham charged forward, tackling the man before he could fire again. They grappled for the weapon, rolling across the dusty floor. Catherine looked around frantically for something, anything to help. Her eyes landed on a heavy iron pan and she grabbed it, bringing it down hard on the back of the man's skull. He went limp, and Graham wrestled the pistol from his grip. "That was incredibly brave and incredibly stupid," Graham gasped, checking the pistol's chamber. "You could have been killed." "So could you. I was not going to let that happen." Catherine grabbed his face, checking the damage. His lip was split and one eye was swelling shut, but he was alive. That was all that mattered. Outside, the gunfight was winding down. They emerged cautiously to find Wright and Henderson standing over three prone figures, with the other members of their party securing the horses. Reeves himself was on his knees, hands raised, his face a mask of impotent fury. "Real Marshal is going to want to talk to you," Wright said, his gun trained steadily on Reeves. "Plenty of folks around here who will testify to your crimes." The ride back to St. Elmo happened in a blur. They stopped in Buena Vista to turn Reeves and his surviving men over to the actual sheriff, who was astonished and grateful to have the notorious gang in custody. By the time Catherine and Graham returned home, it was well past midnight, both of them exhausted and shaken. "I cannot believe you did that," Graham said as Catherine cleaned his wounds by lamplight in the kitchen. "You rode into danger for me." "You saved me from falling," Catherine replied softly, dabbing at his split lip with a wet cloth. "It seemed only fair to return the favor." "Catherine." His hand caught hers, stilling her ministrations. "I love you. I know it is fast. I know we have not known each other long, but I need you to know that. When I was tied to that chair thinking I might die, all I could think about was you and all the time we would not have together. All the conversations we would not share, the dreams we would not build. I love you, and I want to spend whatever time I have left on this earth making you happy." Tears spilled down Catherine's cheeks, hot and cleansing. "I love you too. I fought against it at first because I was so afraid of being hurt again, of losing myself in someone else's needs and wants. But you are not Robert. You see me, truly see me, and you make me want to be brave. I want to build that future with you, Graham, whatever it holds." He pulled her into his lap, mindful of his injuries, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her ache. This was nothing like the dutiful, passionless embraces she had endured in her marriage. This was fire and promise and coming home all at once. "Marry me," Graham whispered against her lips. "Not for the land or the partnership or what people will say. Marry me because you want to wake up beside me every morning and fall asleep in my arms every night. Marry me because we are better together than we ever were apart." "Yes." Catherine laughed through her tears. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married 3 weeks later by the circuit preacher who passed through St. Elmo on his monthly rounds. It was a simple ceremony held in the newly repaired front room of Catherine's house, with the Hendersons and a handful of neighbors as witnesses. Catherine wore a pale blue dress she had sewn herself, and Graham had gotten a haircut and shaved for the occasion, making him look younger and somehow more vulnerable. "Do you, Catherine Marie Vaughn, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward?" "I do." Catherine's voice was clear and sure, her eyes never leaving Graham's face. "And do you, Graham Thomas Irving, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward?" "I do." Graham's voice cracked slightly with emotion, and Catherine felt fresh tears threaten. "Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Graham's kiss was sweet and reverent, and when they pulled apart, Catherine saw her own joy reflected in his eyes. This was a new beginning, a chance to build something beautiful from the ashes of her past. The celebration afterward was small but heartfelt. Mrs. Henderson had baked a cake, and Mr. Henderson produced a bottle of whiskey he had been saving for a special occasion. They toasted the newlyweds and shared stories and laughter until the sun began to set. When the last guest had departed, Graham swept Catherine into his arms, carrying her across the threshold of their bedroom like she weighed nothing at all. "Mrs. Irving," he murmured against her hair, "I like the sound of that. So do I." Catherine wrapped her arms around his neck, marveling at how right this felt, how completely she trusted this man who had caught her when she fell in every possible way. Their wedding night was tender and passionate by turns, a revelation of intimacy that Catherine had never experienced in her first marriage. Graham was patient and attentive, making her pleasure his priority in ways that left her breathless and wondering. She had not known it could be like this, that physical union could be an extension of emotional connection rather than just duty. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the moonlight streaming through the window, and Catherine traced lazy patterns on Graham's chest, feeling his heartbeat steady beneath her palm. "Are you happy?" he asked softly, his fingers combing through her unbound hair. "Happier than I have ever been. Happier than I knew I could be." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him properly. "Thank you for catching me, Graham, in every way that matters. Thank you for letting me." He pulled her down for a long, slow kiss that promised this was only the beginning of their story. The months that followed were busy and full. Graham began the work of establishing his ranch, purchasing cattle, and hiring a couple of hands to help with the operation. Catherine continued her sewing business, but also threw herself into making their house a true home, adding curtains and rugs and all the small touches that transformed a structure into a sanctuary. They worked side by side through the harsh Colorado winter, feeding cattle through snowstorms and keeping fires burning against the bitter cold. There were hard days when money was tight and the work seemed endless. But there were also evenings by the fire, reading poetry aloud to each other and planning for the future. There were Sunday mornings tangled together in bed, making love while snow piled against the windows. There were small victories, like the first successful calving season, and quiet moments of perfect contentment. By the time spring arrived, Catherine was pregnant. She broke the news to Graham on a warm May morning as they worked together in the garden, planting vegetables for the coming season. "I have something to tell you," she said, setting down her trowel and brushing dirt from her hands. "We are going to have a baby. Sometime in late October or early November, the doctor thinks." Graham's face went through a remarkable series of expressions: shock, joy, wonder, fear, all in rapid succession. Then he was laughing and crying at the same time, sweeping Catherine up and spinning her around despite her protests about being careful. "A baby," he kept repeating as though he could not quite believe it. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Catherine asked, suddenly nervous. They had not discussed children explicitly, though she had assumed it was something they both wanted eventually. "Happy does not even begin to cover it." Graham set her down gently, his hands cradling her face. "Catherine, you have given me everything I ever wanted: a home, a purpose, love, and now a child. I do not know what I did to deserve all of this, but I swear I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of it." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer. Catherine's body changed and swelled, and Graham treated her like she was made of spun glass, constantly fussing and trying to prevent her from doing any heavy work. It drove her slightly mad, but she also found it endearing, this fierce protectiveness that manifested in 1,000 small ways. She sewed tiny clothes and Graham built a cradle from smooth pine, carving intricate designs into the headboard with painstaking care. They argued playfully about names and made elaborate plans for the future, imagining the child who would inherit their combined determination and dreams. In early November, on a crisp afternoon when the aspens had turned gold and the air smelled of coming snow, Catherine's labor began. Mrs. Henderson came to assist, along with the doctor from Buena Vista, who had agreed to stay in town for the birth. Graham paced the parlor like a caged animal, starting at every sound from the bedroom. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Catherine had never known such pain, waves of it that crashed over her until she thought she might drown. But she held onto Graham's hand when he was allowed in the room, drawing strength from his presence even as she cursed him for doing this to her. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, the baby arrived with a lusty cry that seemed too large for such a small creature. "It is a boy," the doctor announced, placing the squalling infant on Catherine's chest. "Healthy lungs, that is for certain." Catherine stared down at her son through tears of exhaustion and overwhelming love. He was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair that stood up in all directions. He was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." Graham appeared at her side, his face wet with tears as he gazed at his son. "He is perfect. You are perfect. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you for this gift." They named him Charles Thomas Irving, after Catherine's grandfather and Graham's middle name. Charlie, as they immediately began calling him, proved to be a vocal and demanding infant who kept them both exhausted and besotted in equal measure. The winter months were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feedings, of tiny fingers gripping adult hands with surprising strength, and the sweet smell of baby skin. Catherine had never been so tired, but she also had never felt such pure, uncomplicated love. Watching Graham with their son, seeing the tenderness with which he held and soothed the baby, made her fall in love with him all over again. Spring arrived with its usual rush of activity. The cattle had survived another winter, and the herd was growing. Graham's reputation as an honest rancher spread, and he began to pick up contracts supplying beef to mining camps in the area. The business was still small, but it was stable and growing, providing a solid foundation for their future. When Charlie was 6 months old, sitting up and babbling nonsense syllables that they pretended were words, Catherine discovered she was pregnant again. "So soon?" Graham asked, though he was grinning as he said it. "Apparently your mother was right when she warned me you came from a fertile family," Catherine replied dryly. "I hope you are prepared for a house full of children, Mr. Irving." "I will take as many as you are willing to give me, Mrs. Irving." He kissed her soundly, one hand drifting to her still flat stomach. "Our own little dynasty." This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Catherine knew what to expect, or perhaps simply because she was too busy chasing after Charlie to dwell on discomfort. She continued working through her pregnancy, sewing and managing the household and helping Graham with ranch accounts. Their daughter arrived in early spring, on a morning when the first wildflowers were pushing through the melting snow. The birth was faster this time, though no less intense. When the doctor placed the baby girl in Catherine's arms, she felt a completion she had not known she was missing. "What should we call her?" Graham asked, tracing a finger over the baby's tiny features with reverent wonder. "Sarah," Catherine said immediately. "Sarah Grace Irving. After your mother and for the grace that brought us together." They were a family of 4 now, their little house filled with noise and laughter and love. Charlie, at a year old, was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly trying to help in his clumsy toddler way. Graham expanded the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen to accommodate their growing family. The years rolled past in a rhythm of seasons and celebrations. Charlie grew into a bright, curious boy who followed his father everywhere, wanting to help with every aspect of ranch work. Sarah proved to have her mother's quick mind and her father's stubborn determination, a combination that led to equal parts delight and exasperation. Catherine watched her children grow with a fierce pride and gratitude. They were healthy and loved and secure, everything she had been denied in her own childhood. She and Graham made sure of it, creating a home filled with warmth and acceptance. The ranch prospered as well. By the time Charlie was 5 and Sarah 3, Graham employed 6 permanent hands and owned over 300 head of cattle. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable in building something that would last. St. Elmo itself was changing. The mining boom had mostly played out, and the town was slowly shrinking as people moved on to new opportunities. But a core community remained, people who had put down roots and were committed to making lives in this high mountain valley. Catherine became more involved in the community as her children grew. She organized a women's sewing circle that met weekly, as much for companionship as for the work. She taught Sunday school at the small church that served the town. She advocated for the establishment of a proper school, and when one finally opened, she served on the board that hired teachers and set curriculum. Graham, too, found his place in the community. He was elected to the town council and used his position to push for improvements, better roads, a telegraph line connection, fair treatment for the few Chinese and Mexican families who remained in the area working small claims and service businesses. On a warm summer evening in 1889, 6 years after their wedding, Catherine and Graham sat on the widow's walk that had brought them together. Below, they could see Charlie and Sarah playing in the yard, their laughter drifting up on the gentle breeze. The ranch spread out around them, prosperous and well-maintained, a testament to years of hard work and shared dreams. "You ever miss Philadelphia?" Graham asked, his arm around Catherine's shoulders as they watched the sun set over the mountains. "Not even a little bit," Catherine replied honestly. "Everything I need is right here. You, our children, this life we have built together. I would not trade it for anything." Not even if I told you I am thinking about expanding again. There is a property adjacent to ours that is about to go up for sale. With that land, we could double our herd, maybe start breeding horses as well as cattle. Graham's voice held a note of excitement, the same enthusiasm he got whenever he was planning for the future. Then we should buy it. Catherine turned to kiss him softly. I trust you, Graham. I trust us. Whatever comes, we will face it together. Together, Graham echoed, sealing the promise with another kiss. They did buy the adjacent property, and the ranch continued to grow. Another son, Robert Graham Irving, arrived in 1890, named partly for Catherine's late first husband, though she made sure to explain to Graham it was about honoring the past, not living in it. This Robert would have the love and security his namesake had failed to provide. A final child, a daughter they named Grace Catherine Irving, completed their family in 1893. 4 children seemed like exactly the right number, keeping them busy and fulfilled without being completely overwhelmed. The years continued their steady march. Charlie grew into a capable young man who loved ranching as much as his father did, already talking about his future running the operation. Sarah proved to have a gift for figures and management, keeping the ranch accounts with a precision that made Catherine proud. Little Robert was the dreamer of the family, always reading or sketching, talking about traveling to see the world beyond Colorado. Grace was still too young to show her full personality, but she had a determination that suggested she would leave her own mark on the world. In 1898, 15 years after that fateful day when Catherine had fallen and Graham had caught her, they stood together at a community celebration marking St. Elmo's 25th anniversary as an incorporated town. The event was bittersweet, as everyone knew the town was slowly dying, the mines played out and opportunities elsewhere drawing people away. What will you do if the town fails? Someone asked Graham that evening. Will you move on like the others? Graham looked at Catherine, and she saw her own answer reflected in his eyes. This is our home, he said simply. We will be among the last to leave if we leave at all. Sometimes the best things are worth fighting for, worth staying for, even when others give up. Catherine squeezed his hand, thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. She had come to St. Elmo as a frightened young bride, trapped in a loveless marriage, believing her life was over before it had truly begun. Then the widow's walk had broken, and Graham had caught her, and everything had changed. It had not always been easy. They had faced hardship and danger, lean years and hard winters. They had lost friends and neighbors to disease and distance. They had struggled and fought and sometimes wondered if they were making the right choices. But through it all, they had each other. That foundation, that partnership built on mutual respect and deep love, had carried them through every challenge. They had built not just a ranch, but a family, a legacy, a life rich with meaning and purpose. As the celebration continued around them, music and laughter filling the warm summer night, Catherine leaned into Graham's embrace and felt nothing but gratitude. She was no longer the lost young widow who had nearly fallen to her death. She was Catherine Irving, beloved wife and mother, respected member of her community, partner in a thriving ranch. And it had all started because a kind cowboy with green eyes and an honest heart had been in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment, ready to catch her when she fell. The town of St. Elmo did eventually decline, shrinking to a shadow of its former self as the 20th century arrived. But the Irving Ranch prospered, adapting and evolving with the changing times. Graham and Catherine worked side by side for decades, watching their children grow and have families of their own, welcoming grandchildren who would carry their legacy forward into the new century. In their old age, They would sit together on that same widow's walk that Graham had so carefully rebuilt, now weathered by years but still solid and safe. They would hold hands and watch the sun set over mountains that never changed, even as everything else around them transformed. No regrets. Graham would ask, as he had asked countless times over the years. Not a single one, Catherine would reply, as she always did. You caught me, and you never let me fall again. How could I regret anything about this life? And Graham would smile and pull her closer, and they would sit in comfortable silence. Two souls who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful and lasting from that chance encounter. Years later, when both had passed and their children were settling their affairs, Charlie would find his father's journal tucked away in a drawer. In it, Graham had written about that first day, the moment he had looked up and seen a woman falling and reacted on pure instinct. I caught her body that day, the entry read in Graham's careful handwriting. But the truth is, she caught my heart in the very same moment. Everything good in my life started from that single instant of being in the right place at the right time. I have never believed much in fate or destiny, but I believe in Catherine. I believe in us. And I believe that some things are simply meant to be, no matter how improbable they might seem. The widow's walk broke and my life began. May anyone reading this be so lucky as to find their own moment of fate, their own person worth catching and being caught by. It is the greatest gift this world has to offer. Charlie closed the journal carefully, tears streaming down his weathered face. He was an old man himself now, with grandchildren of his own. But he remembered his parents' love as vividly as if he were still that little boy watching them work together, laugh together, build their life together. That journal would become a family treasure, passed down through generations along with the ranch, and the stories of the cowboy who caught the falling widow and the remarkable life they built together. St. Elmo became a ghost town, abandoned and silent, but the Irving Ranch remained, a testament to the power of love, hard work, and being brave enough to catch someone when they fall. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whistled through the remaining buildings of St. Elmo, some folks claimed you could hear laughter drifting from the old Irving place, the sound of a couple so in love that even death could not fully separate them. Whether that was truth or just the romantic imaginings of people who wanted to believe in such things, no one could say for certain. But the widow's walk still stood, rebuilt with care and maintained by generations of Irvings who knew the story of how their family began. It had broken under Catherine's weight all those years ago, but Graham had caught her before she hit the ground. And in doing so, he had given them both something far more valuable than safety from a fall. He had given them a chance at love, at partnership, at building something that would outlast them both. He had given them a future full of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who would carry their story forward. He had given them a home, not just in the physical sense but in each other, a place where they both finally belonged. The widow's walk had broken, but from those splintered boards and that moment of terror, something beautiful and enduring had grown. A love story for the ages, set against the harsh beauty of the Colorado mountains, proving that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can become the doorways to the best. Catherine and Graham's story became legend in the Irving family, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. The details might have become embellished over time, but the core truth remained constant. Two people had found each other when both needed saving, and together they had built a life that mattered. And long after both had returned to the earth, they had worked so hard. The ranch they had built continued to thrive, passing from Irving's hand to Irving hand, a living monument to the power of catching someone when they fall and choosing to hold on tight, no matter what storms might come. The legacy of that single moment, when wood broke and arms reached out and two lives intertwined, echoed through decades and generations. It was a reminder that love, real and true and lasting, often begins in the most unexpected ways. That sometimes fate does intervene, putting people in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. And that the greatest adventure of all is choosing to build a life with someone who sees you, truly sees you, and loves what they find. Catherine Vaughn Irving and Graham Thomas Irving lived long, full lives surrounded by family and love. When they died within months of each other, as long married couples often do, they were laid to rest on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked by simple stones that bore their names and a single inscription chosen by their children. She fell. He caught her. Together they soared. And every spring, wildflowers bloomed around those graves in profusion. Columbine and Indian paintbrush and alpine forget-me-nots, painting the hillside in colors as vibrant and enduring as the love story that had started with a broken widow's walk and a cowboy's quick reflexes in St. Elmo, Colorado, in the summer of 1883.